Okay, so this is going to be a less formal video. It's not going to have like citations or sources or anything. For that, go to the previous one. This is just going to be like my thoughts after having, read up on the French Revolution and then making the mating, making the video on it. So I want to get over some. I have like some notes, but I don't have like a script or anything. So anyway, first thing on the notes is reviewing the books. Um, so they were all good. All of them were very informative. I'd recommend all of them. But the best one is Liberty or Death. Liberty or Death is a good like mixture of the personal and also the political and the social and everything else that's going on. A New World Begins was still good, but it focused too much on the characters and the personalities and so on and so on. It focused too much on the people in the book, and it was a little too uh, I don't know, personal for me. Liberty or Death goes into a it like goes into the it talks about people in the countryside. It talks about the developments there. It spans the whole of France. New World Begins is way too wrapped up in Paris. It's pretty much just about Paris and the people bouncing around and making decisions there, which is it's still a fair way to talk about the French Revolution since Paris is easily the most important city in France and the most important region. In fact, when all the other regions of France rebelled during the Federalist rebellions, they all got squished by France. So it's totally fair to tell a history of the French Revolution just from Paris like that. It's a totally fair thing to do, but nonetheless, I'd recommend Liberty or Death. Um, Oxford History of the French Revolution, Volume 2 was really good, but there's a Volume 3 out now, so you should probably get that first of all. And second of all, it's probably too granular. It's probably too in the weeds. It's very difficult to follow. It's a very high reading level. I can't recommend it to like someone who's just casually interested in history. Um, when I first read it like years and years ago, it just went in one ear and out the other. I could not keep track of it. But yeah, it's still good, and I understood it this time, obviously. So it's still a good book. It's still a good read. Again, it's obsolete now, but it is what it is. So yeah, all good. I'd recommend all of them. Particularly Liberty or Death, though. That was the best one, in my opinion. I think it was the most informative and the most like it just gave you the best picture of France at that time. Okay, so second thing is why France versus America. That's what the note says. This is a commonly asked question as why was the French Revolution so different than the American Revolution? Um, why did it like take so many more lives is I guess the biggest question. And for one thing, it's because, well, the obvious thing is because France is a more populous place than colonial America was at that time. So, just obvious. For another thing, is that the French Revolution, I thought about this a bit before making this video. The French Revolution didn't really know when to stop, in my opinion. I think that once the British were kicked out during the American Revolution, there really wasn't that much left to do. I haven't read up on the American Revolution, to be fair. So I know that there were still other things like the Whiskey Rebellion, but it just couldn't spiral into anything further than what it was, which was a rebellion from Great Britain. French Revolution, once it started, no one knew how to end it, and people people could get like lost. Like they would be fine with the revolution up until a constitutional monarchy, for example, but once the revolution pushed beyond that, they would get lost. And it's not the same thing with the American Revolution. Once you want independence from Britain, like that a person who wants independence from Britain, I don't think can get lost after, they get rid of the British. But as we saw, there were people who like the revolution went faster than they did. It changed faster than they did, and I almost said spiraled out of control, but it did spiral out of the control of like Mirabeau and everyone and all the day ones and Desmolin and I mean Sayus just survived as he said in after the terror. It just got out of hand because it just didn't know where to end, in my opinion. That's how I see it. Another reason that it was so different was because it decided to make war on all of Europe, whereas the United States was only making war on Britain and was actually getting help from like Spain and France. The French Revolution was different because they decided to go to war with not only Britain like the United States did, but they also went to war with, many other sections of France, and they went to war with Spain and Holland and Austria and so on and so on and so on. Um, the last reason is the church. There was no church in the United States, or there was no Catholic Church that had such a wide dominance like the Catholic Church did over France. And so that created this tension with the civil constitution of the clergy, and the fact that the church was sort of against the revolution also complicated it. And again, there was no like domineering church in America at the time, so it just it wasn't compatible. It was a struggle that the Americans didn't have to worry about. Um, I have George Washington here as a reason. I think the thesis here was that, like, oh, well, George Washington was willing to step down from power. George Washington wanted to step down from power. But that sort of implies that the French revolutionaries were power hungry, which I don't think is a totally fair summarization. I think, what's his name? Robespierre. I think Robespierre shit the bed with the Nine Heads speech, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. Um, Turning points. Yeah, see, this is what I meant. Uh, okay, the first turning point actually happened. And what I mean by turning points is things where history could have taken a turn, like an alt history sort of thing. I don't want to focus on alt history, but what I'm saying is that, like, points where things could have turned out drastically differently. Um, the Parliament coup was the best one. So this was before the French Revolution, actually. This was during the reign of Louis the 15th. Um, Louis the 15th overthrew the Paris Parliament, and it's possible that if Louis the 16th was able to just was willing to carry on with what his father had done and just throw out parliaments that disagreed with him and replace them with more amenable people, it's possible that the French Revolution, may not have happened or could have been pushed off, or would have taken a completely different form at the bare minimum. Um, what's it called? I think New World Begins openly speculates on this. I mentioned it in my video, so it's more than fair to call that a turning point. Varennes. Varennes was when the French king tried to slip away and tried to escape, just to give like a brief review, and then he was caught at Varennes. This was a turning point because this was this was like the beginning of the end of a constitutional monarchy. It's possible that if King Louis XVI hadn't tried to slip away to Varennes, France would be a constitutional monarchy for the rest of its existence. It's possible that there would still be a French monarchy, like a recognized French monarchy today, in my opinion, if Louis XVI didn't try to get away. But he did, and then that led to protests that he should go away and that France should be replaced with a republic, like we saw at the Champ de Mars, and then there was the Champ de Mars massacre. Yeah, again, that was the beginning of the end of of any chance of France having a constitutional monarchy, and then it truly died. It truly died when Louis the 18th wanted all of his power back. He wanted all the power of a complete monarch. That wasn't going to happen. So yeah, um, that was a turning point. Varennes was. Um, Thermidor. I have Thermidor down as a turning point, but what I think I really mean is maybe it is referring to Louis the 18th just calming down. Like if Louis the 18th had calmed down and he said like, "Okay, I will go back to France. I will abide by a constitutional monarchy." Maybe that's what I meant by Thermidor being a turning point, but more accurately, what I probably meant was the Robespierre nine heads speech. Robespierre made this speech where he called for nine heads, and it was it was sort of like the end of him. It wasn't just the speech. France was winning the war, and so more and more people began to feel that like he needed to calm down, and he wasn't. And yeah, he at that point the revolution had left Robespierre behind. Robespierre was still in reign of terror mode, and at that point the revolution had pushed past that, and so the revolution got rid of Robespierre. He was overthrown by the Thermidor coup, and that was the end of Robespierre. Um, Babeuf being a turning point shouldn't be in here. Babeuf did not, I don't think, had like a high chance of overthrowing the government of France. I thought he did when I first started making this video, and once I wrote out the notes and everything, and blah blah blah. But at one point, I was going back through the book that I was reading, and or one of the books, and it mentioned that Babeuf's coup actually didn't have like a high chance of succeeding, and it was seen as like excessive of the Directory to kill Babeuf. One of my regrets was focusing so much on Babeuf. I thought he was a more major figure than he was during the revolution. Maybe you could argue in the future, like he's a big deal for like socialist movements, and so he deserves to stay in there. But yeah, I don't think he didn't do anything that needed to be stupid phone. He didn't do anything that like needed to be that needed that much space, that many words. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself. The regrets on my video are later. Let's see. Oh, thoughts on the characters. Um, I only have a few written down here. Babouf, I just talked about him a bunch. I think he's got a great name. I think it's funny that he changed his name to the Gracchus to Gracchi for the Gracchus brothers. Um, Danton, Danton was funny. I don't remember perfectly what made it and didn't make it into the video, but Danton made some comment to his executioner where he said, "Don't forget to hold up my head. It's well worth seeing." Like, I'm so handsome that when you cut my head off, be sure to show the people. You know, I've got a nice mug. That's amazing. That's a great way to spend your last words. Um, One of the things Robespierre raked him over the coals over was that he made a comment about how like the greatest joy or the greatest liberty or whatever is making love to his wife. Like that was like an off-color joke or whatever, and Robespierre got mad at him over that, or made a show of getting mad at him over that. But anyway, there's a third thing I'm surely forgetting, but yeah, Danton was pretty funny. Um, sorry, these aren't like deep examinations of their psychology. I'm not aware of that for the most part. Marat was interesting. Okay, so what is to be said? This one and the last one are going to be like more deep and more interesting. What is to be said? Wow, Danton kind of got screwed over here because he's the only one that didn't get like a thoughtful dive, but it is what it is. So, okay, so Marat, what is to be said about a guy who spends all his time talking about how everyone needs to die and how we need to kill off all these traitors, so on and so on, and then he gets stabbed and he's killed? Is that, I don't know. Post in the comments what you would think of like a political commentator who went around talking about how everyone needed to die and like how all their enemies need to be killed, and then they get killed. Like it's obviously not right to kill that person, but like I don't know. Post in the comments how you view that because I found that very interesting. Because again, it's not right to kill them, but like it's also um it's also not the same thing as like if Marat was just out there arguing like I don't know, some inane, boring points. He wasn't just a political commentator who was just giving his thoughts on the day. It was pretty crazy stuff he was writing. And so do we weigh that differently? Like or does his content not matter at all? Does it matter so little that even if he was saying like more boring or mundane things about politics, that we should weigh those two things the same? If there's a boring guy named Jeff who makes inane political comments and he gets stabbed, is that the same thing as Marat getting stabbed when he makes wild comments about people getting killed? Post in the comments what you think about that, because that's something I was very interested in as I was reading about Marat and him getting stabbed by Charlotte Corday. The last one is Robespierre. Robespierre was the most interesting of all the characters of the French Revolution because at every point in time, he is trying to get away from what he will become. Robespierre exists in the popular imagination as like some crazy guy or like as a proto tyrant who is like all powerful and is just killing people who disagree with him on very minute matters, and yeah, he's just crazy and evil, and he's like killing all these people basically for like no reason. I think, in my opinion, that's how he exists in the popular imagination. If you meet someone who knows who Robespierre is, or honestly, he's like the symbol of the French Revolution. The French Revolution is just people going crazy and killing each other for very spurious reasons, and he is like the poster child of that. And his entire career was him trying to not be that. He was I can't find the source for this, but he was against the Committee of Public Safety, which he served on, in which he ran the Reign of Terror. He was against that initially, and then eventually got brought on board. Um, he was against the death penalty, excuse me, at one point. And the war that gave him all of his power, the war which was the reason for the French Revolution, which raised the tensions in France to the point where, yeah, you could just drag people before a guillotine for very spurious reasons. He was against that war too. At every point, Robespierre was trying to avoid becoming Robespierre. Very interesting, in my opinion. That's how I see it, and I don't think it's a coincidence because, like, pretty much all 3 of the books that I read pointed this out about how Robespierre was against this, Robespierre was against the war. It was nuts, and he ended up surviving the people who wanted to carry out the war, or a lot of them. Ugh. Um, Number 7 is sticking points. I don't know what sticking points is. I wrote these notes too long ago, and I maybe it was just stuff that I wish I had elaborated on more. Because in parentheses it says church separation. Oh, okay. I read that and I know what it means. Okay, so the sticking point for me, like the question I have, is church separation. So at one point in one of the books, I can't remember which, but they say that like a simple separation of church and state wasn't possible because it held too much power. The church held too much power in society. But then later, or in a different book, it said that they tried to shoot for just a simple church separation, a separation of church and state during the Directory. That felt a little muddled, but I guess I can't really lock in on that because I don't remember which books were making the claims about that claim about the Directory. So, um, my judgment on the Revolution, um, I don't know. That feels a bit presumptuous. Um, it feels like it. It feels silly to like try to nail down the French Revolution here. I read I read the conclusion to the Oxford History of the French Revolution Volume 2. It it does have the best conclusion, and I still just could not make heads or tails of what to think about the French Revolution. Um, William Doyle calls it a tragedy. Um, but I don't know. It's the problem with it is that it sort of like exists between what human beings can control and what they can't control. Like calling it a tragedy makes it sound like it wasn't even done by people. Like it was or it was just done by like one or a handful of malicious people. So I just don't know how to feel about it for that reason. For the reason that it just slipped out of the hands of people so quickly, and for the it was something that humans did. The French Revolution could not have happened without people. It is a social phenomenon. It is a man-made thing. But none of the men seemed to control the French Revolution. So that's why I'm having such a hard time understanding it or having like a judgment on it. Um, okay. So this is one of this last part. It doesn't look like yeah, there's no more oh wait, there is. That's what it should be. Okay. Why I chose the French Revolution. Its importance to history is pretty much immeasurable. I think it is the most important thing to happen in world politics ever. I can't think nothing springs to mind that is more important than the French Revolution. It created nationalism. It created like the idea of a citizen and that you're supposed to be involved in your country's politics. You pretty much see yourself in the same way that a French revolutionary saw themselves. You see your relation to your country the same way that a French citizen saw themselves to their state of France. I can almost guarantee that for the most part. Um, Most people do not think that politics is like the realm of just like lords and dukes and duchesses or whatever. They think it's totally acceptable to have a political opinion, to share that political opinion with others. And so, yeah, that's why I chose it. Um, we'll do this. What was left out? Um, Poland. I didn't talk about Poland. The partition of Poland was going on at this time, and it made it so that like Austria and Prussia could not focus on the French as much because they had to divvy up Poland. Russia especially. I mean, Russia was barely even involved anyways, so it doesn't matter. But yeah, Poland got left out, and Poland is a complete charnel house at this time. It's killing people left and right. It, I think William Doyle points out that it killed more people than like the partitions of Poland and the way that the Russians treated the Polish killed more people than all of the French Revolution, except maybe the Vendée, the war in the Vendée, and except for I'd assume the battles, but yeah, Poland was a wreck, and I barely talked about it. Seigneurs, or basically like landowners, noble landowners. I didn't talk about them a lot. If you read Liberty or Death, pretty much every like third sentence is about seigneurs and the way they controlled French life up until the Revolution. Daily life, I don't actually have any regrets about how I talked about daily life. I thought that was fine. Um, Women's rights, I didn't talk about women's rights a lot in this video. Even though like there were a lot of interesting movements around that time, but they also like weren't significant. They weren't getting a lot of ground. There wasn't a lot like there wasn't the idea of having a woman vote was pretty much seemed inconceivable. Hardly anyone seemed to talk about it. Um Harvests, I didn't talk about the various harvests and how bad or how good they were throughout the revolution. It sounds stupid, but it was very important, I assure you. Um but yeah, I just didn't get into it a lot. I think I covered like the 89 harvest and that's it. Um Characters, I didn't talk about. I mean, I feel like I did okay with the characters. It was only a 1 hour video. Like I didn't blow it up into like 14 hours or whatever. Um and then the rest is like channel stuff, which I'm just gonna skip because who gives a shit? It doesn't matter.